Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the My Love of Golf podcast. Today is another interview in the interview series of My Love of Golf podcast with a young man that I've known for a little while now. His name's Steve Smith, or you may know him as the Golfing Greenkeeper. Now, Steve is a former greenkeeping superintendent who's plied his trade on a number of courses around the traps in New South Wales and is now dedicating some time to helping us understand the behind-the-scenes world of greenkeeping. Now, as golfers, we all sometimes don't give enough thought to the world of greenkeeping and the effort that the greenkeepers and the ground staff of these great golf courses that we all play on go into to keep them pristine. Now, Steve's joining me today to help us understand a little bit more about the world of greenkeeping and his world as the Golfing Greenkeeper, and he's got some special insights into some very special courses. So, without further ado, thanks for joining us again. As always, like, subscribe, share this podcast if you've liked what we do and want to help us keep growing. Tell a friend, share it, but this time sit back, relax, enjoy the interview with Steve, the Golfing Greenkeeper. It's going to be a good one. Thanks again. Steve Smith, the Golfing Greenkeeper, welcome to the My Love of Golf podcast. How are you, sir?
Good, thanks, Ross. Mate, thank you very much for having me.
Mate, was that intro okay? Was that all right?
Yeah, mate, that was perfect.
Excellent work.
Awesome.
So, mate, the Golfing Greenkeeper, let's go back to the start of life as the Golfing Greenkeeper. So where did the journey begin for you, young man?
Well, mate, so for me, look, I suppose it was something that in a roundabout way I kind of fell into in a sense. I was fortunate enough, I grew up in the Blue Mountains, west of Sydney, so I consider myself, it's on the verge of, I suppose, metropolitan and country life, and I consider myself a little bit more country. And we actually grew up next door. The back fence was Wentworth Falls Country Club in the Blue Mountains. And some people may or may not have heard of it, but that was basically my backyard. So from the age of 8, when we moved up there, that was the backyard, and we just used to go out there and hit a golf ball and play. And eventually my father, my old man, would play golf out the back, and he sort of got us to join up as juniors for something to do and keep us occupied instead of rummaging around the bush and, I suppose, doing all sorts of fun things that kids do before the world of iPhones and iPads. But so, yeah, we just used to occupy ourselves in the backyard, and I got into golf and really enjoyed the game and loved playing it and got better and better. And as I grew up, the opportunities of work arise that, you get older and become a teenager, you need money and bits and pieces. And when I was 15, the course, the Greenkeepers, the club, were looking for someone to, I suppose, that was affordable for one, that could work on weekends before the competition and just do a little bit of that basic prep of checking bunkers, getting the dew off the greens, making sure that the course was presentable, no damage overnight from any hooligans or whatever it might have been. And I wanted to be out there. It was just something that I wanted to try and be part of. And I loved the game. So I started that at the age of 15, and then eventually finishing school, took on an apprenticeship. And I suppose life began as an apprentice greenkeeper from that point. That's all I know, mate, to be fair. Yeah. That's all I know is greenkeeping.
So back in the early days there at Wentworth Golf Club, how many people were on the team that you were part of, tending to the greens and the fairways and the tees and the rough at Wentworth, mate?
Look, so I suppose golf was different a little bit, and I'm talking 24 years ago, in a sense that there were more people required to maintain a golf course, and there was probably relatively, there's probably a little bit more money around then, with more of the clubs having more members, and it was a member-based club, even though it was a public access one as well, and still is today, I might add. So we had, from what I can recall, there were 6 guys running around. There was 3 apprentices and 3 greenkeepers, and we all had jobs to do, and it was before the world of fairway watering being accessible to a lot of courses, and so things were slower to do. Machines weren't as efficient as they are today. They weren't, there was more hands-on work required if you didn't have an irrigation system. So there was a lot of manual work involved. And the club wasn't exactly, I suppose, rolling, I say that loosely, but didn't have a lot of money. So work was certainly more labour intensive, and to do lots of the jobs that we sort of do now with large scale machinery, and like I said, they're a lot more efficient now. So we had 6 on course, and I became one of those guys. And as my time went on as an apprentice, those numbers did drop, and that I attribute it to the efficiencies in the trade, as it were, with the improvements in machinery, and then ultimately irrigation and all that sort of stuff. So the club could then invest in infrastructure and equipment, and you would then save in labour costs as time went on, and natural attrition with people moving.
How is the greenkeeping trade perceived in current times, do you think? What do you think of that?
Look, it's a funny thing. I was in a bubble. As a superintendent, which I eventually came to be, on another golf course at Katoomba in the Blue Mountains. But when I was a super, and we were doing construction, and it was a development of a golf course, so I was very much in a bubble. And you look at things with the people that you talk to in the industry and the things that you're doing. Now that I'm away from that, in a sense that I'm no longer working on a golf course, I talk to a lot more of the people playing, the average Joes out there, family members who play golf, whether it be for holidays or casually or whatever it might be. So I've sort of now started to see a lot of the other side, as it were, on the perception of. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very much two-tailed. I think you have some people who view it as a very qualified profession that works on the edge of science and agronomy and that sort of type of thing, and certainly in Australia's climate now, water efficiency and that sort of stuff, and view it as a very, like I said, a very high-profile role and a very specific one. Then you get a lot of, and I don't mean to be rude to anyone, then you get a lot of people that aren't in golf or in agronomy or greenkeeping or agriculture, in a sense, that view it still today as something that, in a sense, they see it as a poison on the environment in terms of fertiliser use and fungicide, pesticides across the board, and how they're utilised. They go, well, those things are being applied in that property or that site. Well, that's not good. It's perceived as not good because they don't understand how those things work. And I'm not saying that everything that is, all the inputs in a golf course are they won't have some sort of effect on whatever the target role is of what you're trying to achieve. But people outside it will just go, well, that's a high input area on a golf course that should never really be like that. Golf courses and turf, like monoculture type sites, that you're creating something that's unnatural. So they go, well, all those inputs aren't required. They should never be like that. So it's in a sense, what's leaching through, what's being put in, what are the after effects of, will they be found 20, 30 years down the track? Who knows? So they just go, that shouldn't be done. Yeah. And they don't understand it. And I totally appreciate that. It's like anything you don't understand, it's hard to grasp. And you do have a thought process that maybe something untoward could happen in the future because we don't know it. So I do think there's very much two sides to the view of greenkeeping. And I think the industry itself, certainly across the globe, but locally in Australia, has been doing a lot to try and improve their perception by others on them and how they're viewed by improving their environmental efforts and the way that they protect their sites and minimise those inputs and try and be certainly very much more conscious of any over inputs that are unnecessary. and try and keep things to a minimum that have no residual after effects. And there have been some instances in the past, sadly, where things have gone wrong. And I do suppose that people do make some mistakes from time to time, sadly as well. But I don't believe anyone should be tarnished forever. And certainly an industry will have to try and move and improve out of that. And I think that the greenkeeping industry has done so a lot in some big leaps and bounds over the last 20 years.
We've jumped straight into the pointy end there with that discussion. And I get it. You know, I'm obviously a golfer, and I get the sense that, you know, the environmental sustainability aspect of what you talked about there is a growing topic. It's not going away. And of course, as you've articulated very well, that it's something that's, you know, every greenkeeping body needs to be conscious of and working towards, and setting new standards and pushing the boundaries and looking for ways to do the things that you're talking about. What I was thinking as you were talking is greenkeeping any different to any of the other, you know, grounds maintenance type fields, you know, be it councils tending to sports parks and councils tending to, you know, other areas. You know, I say councils twice there, but, you know, I'm sure farming and, you know, you referred to greenkeeping as a form of agriculture. Is it doing anything vastly different to any of those other forms of agriculture or greenkeeping or ground management, grounds maintenance?
Look, I mean, greenkeeping, if you boil down the essence of it, is obviously maintaining turf. Mm-hmm. But a golf course isn't just turf. You talk about councils in turf prep, sports, playing fields, that sort of stuff. We talk about, you know, the MCGs of the world, cricket wickets around, sporting fields, soccer fields, amenity lawns of council areas, you could even go into large sort of wedding venues with lawns and gardens and the like. You're maintaining a turf surface. So, you know, those areas that are solely turf oriented in sports turf will have similar inputs to a golf course. The difference I find, and this is just my personal view, to, you know, an SCG or an MCG to a golf course, is that there's so many more other environmental ingredients, as it were, to the landscape. And I often talk about landscape when I talk about golf courses, because a golf course can either be invented, as it were, in that everything's just clear field and man-made. Everyone knows plenty of examples of that around the place, across the world. And then there's those other ones that are the more natural sites, where a golf course is more discovered through a landscape. And those turf areas are placed throughout to make the golf sort of evolve as you go along, and it feels like it was always there. It was an inherent part of that space. But with a landscape that is a golf course, you have natural riparian corridors of bush, thoroughfares for wildlife. There's usually streams, drainage areas that will flow into creeks or rivers if they're not already incorporated, dams, natural swamps, water bodies, you know, dry areas, rainforest areas, high humidity areas, high wind areas. There's so many different parts that make up a landscape. And I'm not taking anything away from the sports turf guys, because that's their field. That's what they do on a cricket field, or on a rugby league field, or any other specific grass type. And on a golf course, you look after those turf areas. But it's the other parts of the landscape in the boundaries of that golf course that need to be cared for. And I say cared for because that's the word, and that's the exercise that you do when you're maintaining that land. You don't just look after grass on a golf course. And I think some people that are either new to the game or don't understand it, or some people are certainly oblivious to it and just generally don't care. They're out there just to play golf, and there's nothing wrong with that either. But every part of a golf course, from fence to fence, boundary to boundary, is cared for. Whether it's untouched or touched, it's done for a purpose and for a reason. And whether it looks natural, it could have been man-made to look that way. It could actually be natural. And, you know, where we were at Katoomba, and I can speak of my site there, inside the bounds, we had a golf course inside our boundary of the course. We had 18 holes, but about 30% of the actual property that was laid out as the golf course land included an environmental protected area that couldn't be touched by the golf course, but we had to work towards maintaining and keeping weeds out. It had some hanging swamps, which are endemic to the Blue Mountains, and they're very unique spaces with the soil underneath in the subsurface and how they work and that sort of stuff. So it's not just the grass. There's a lot of other things that go on a golf course that need to be cared for.
As I mentioned to you in the past, my brother was the greenkeeper of the family, and he had he did his apprenticeship down at Macquarie Links, which you'll be familiar with down there in Sydney, and then he moved up to the
Hayworth Design.
Then he moved up to the Vintage and worked up there with Bob Harrison. Yep. And then he returned to our home course, which was Cessnock Country Golf Club, then the Oaks, then Stonebridge, then Cessnock Country Golf Club, and then unfortunately one of these courses that is no more.
Much like my last one.
But he saw the world of greenkeeping, maintenance from construction through to grow-in, through to the establishment of the course, and then going back to that local country type course where there was three or four staff, and his world was 5 a.m. in the morning till 5 p.m. at night, and then pretty much at the behest of what's felt like to him at many times, the behest of every member. Don't like this, I like this, change that, move this, why is that like that, all of that sort of thing, which he could cope with. But I think ultimately, he moved away from the trade, and I think it was that sort of permanent 7 day a week sort of environment, what felt like 7 day a week, and 5 a.m. till 5 p.m. and that just sort of took him away from it. Do you think that the trade is growing, or are more people coming to it? I think maybe the standards have changed since he was doing it, but do you think more people are doing greenkeeping or considering greenkeeping as a trade?
Look, that's a very good question. My experience on what I've seen from being an apprentice and the size of our team at that time changing slowly, and then I moved on to being a superintendent, which was then part of the club, and then employing people and training up apprentices. It's changed so much. I used to go to a TAFE in Western Sydney that opened up and introduced greenkeeping in Western Sydney because they needed more facilities to teach. At the time that Katoomba closed in 2013, they closed that TAFE down because there wasn't enough greenkeepers coming in that wanted to be apprentices. Mm. I know superintendents now, today in Sydney, that struggle to get apprentices, that struggle to get people to apply. They'll advertise for an apprenticeship as a greenkeeper, and they might. I've actually had guys tell me they've had no responses.
You're right.
And it's actually really sad to see. There are a lot of changes in greenkeeping. Like I talked about efficiency before, and I was part of a testing day a year and a half ago now, I think it was, with a company out of Wagga, SME Mowers, who have they are distributing through Australia an autonomous fairway mower, autonomous robotic fairway mower.
Wow.
That can basically go out and cut fairways on its own.
Using GPS.
It's a more localized system that will do plus or minus, I think, 10 mil on the location. GPS is too variable.
Yeah, right.
It's got a much higher variable in its location, so they've got to do a local. I don't remember what it's called, but it's basically a local GPS or local mapping system that can do it to nearly an exact location, much closer than GPS. And they're the sorts of things. So, like I talked about earlier, with irrigation improvements and efficiencies of machines and the speed at which they can cut, the number of heads that they've got, the area that they can cover over a certain period of time, all those things have changes to to the amount of labour input required on a golf course, you have the wonderful, great golf courses of the country that still need labour because they want hand-mown greens and they want, bunkers raked a certain way, and you've got to tend to a lot of areas that need weed control and all those sorts of things. So they need labour, and they can afford it. But you have the sort of more, I say rudimentary loosely, but local club courses, public access, council-run tracks, country courses that have, I know plenty of country courses that have one greenkeeper.
Yeah, jack of all trades.
And as I'm sure you do, as I'm sure you know, and plenty of people would know them. Yep. And it's difficult to do. So are there more people coming into greenkeeping? I would say no, sadly. Some of that's through efficiencies in the industry, and some of it's through, I suppose, new opportunities and new job opportunities where young people are looking to IT, and there's a boom in all of that type of stuff. It's certainly, as I mentioned, robotics and AI, that they're moving towards those things more so than greenkeeping. And at the same time, people want to earn a living, and there's not a great deal of high-profile or well-paid apprenticeships out there that's going to give you a good enough living to live out of home in Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane, where if you go into IT or something like that, you're going to earn a lot more money straight up. And I think that's where a lot of people are heading, and potentially, being nurtured by their parents into those fields as well.
I understand. Well, I think there's definitely no shortage of greenkeepers and apprentices at Peninsula Kingswood. I saw a picture of the guys the other day, and they could have fielded 3 football teams with the amount of guys, and we'll talk about that in a second. Now, the Golfing Greenkeeper.
Yep.
What's the purpose behind your online persona as the Golfing Greenkeeper? Now, for me, from what I can see in the Golfing Greenkeeper, you've got your Instagram page.
Yep.
How else do we get in contact with you as the Golfing Greenkeeper?
Look, I've got a Facebook page, which I'm sort of just starting. It's very, I suppose, not something that I use a lot. I started it through Instagram because for me as a social media platform, Instagram was very much picture-based, obviously. So I found it really enjoyable to try and put the content out. It's very visual. That's the basis of the platform. And when you go out on a golf course, you're immersed by what you see. And that's how I started. So for me, in terms of contact, it's all through Instagram. That's the main platform that I use a lot for everything to do with the Golfing Greenkeeper. I love the way the platform works, and you can take videos and photos and all those types of things and do live stuff. And so I'm doing interviews and bits and pieces now. But it's through Instagram that I've really enjoyed more and more trying to, I suppose, promote the behind the scenes of a golf course to people that play golf, that have a love of golf, that want to know a little bit more about how it comes to be. And it's just the visuals of the platform, because that's how I see golf. I walk onto a golf course and I'm sure we've all done it. We've been somewhere that either surprised us or is a bucket list, and we just stand there from the moment we either drive to the driveway and we go, wow, or we get out of the car and we go to the main viewing area, be it near the pro shop or the clubhouse balcony or whatever it might be, and you just stand there and you go, look at this place. Yeah. Look at what this is. And I love it now. I haven't done anything else, and I already love it. Yeah. And that's really what I want to try and do from the Golfing Greenkeeper, is show people places that they haven't been to yet, they don't know about yet, they might have seen before and haven't seen recently, and just go, wow, that's there, or this is new, or I want to go there and check it out, see this is what it is. You need to now come here and see it for yourself.
Well, one of the things that you've been privileged enough and lucky enough to be able to do is to get some special access to some special courses of more recent times. And one of those courses was probably going to be the biggest course on everyone's lips in the next week or so. and that was Royal Melbourne. So you recently had a visit to Royal Melbourne, and you spent some time with Mr. Forsyth down there.
I did indeed. I did indeed.
I don't think that I'm going to get any access to Richard Forsyth between now and the President's Cup. So, mate, you're going to have to deputise as his fill-in and give us the inside juice into what's going on down there at Royal Melbourne in preparation for the President's Cup and Tiger Woods.
And Tiger Woods, mate. Well, look, I'll do my best with the insight that Richard was so very, very kind to give me. Part of what I do now with having a little bit more time not being on a golf course myself is you're right, I get the chance to try and knock on the door and see the courses that I couldn't see while I was busy working on one, and still learn, which is what I love to do in the greenkeeping side and golf architecture side, is still learn. So, yeah, Richard was very kind and gave me an hour of his time just to see what it was like to prep for a major tournament. I've not worked on one, never seen one in preparation, so it was really, really interesting to see what is involved on such a large scale. And the first thing that I got out of Richard was the scale of the President's Cup. It's the largest tournament that our country has hosted. So it's bigger than our Australian Open. It's bigger than our PGA. It's bigger than our and I didn't realize, and that's not necessarily in how it's viewed by our professional golfers or anything like that. It's more about the spectators. That when I talk about size, that's really what we're talking about is the amount of spectators and the numbers that they were talking about that Richard was saying was something like 30 to 35,000 people a day is expected to move through Royal Melbourne. This President's Cup, when they had it in 2011, was somewhere around 18,000 people a day. So this year, for rough numbers, let's say they're expecting double the amount of people to be at the golf course to watch it. It's certainly, as you mentioned, it's on everyone's lips about this event this year. And being at Royal, the teams that are coming, have the internationals got much of a chance? You know, sadly, Brooks Koepka's not coming and replaced by Ricky. But it's going to be incredibly fascinating to see how the course is tackled and how the players play against each other, because also it's not a single stroke format where they're playing for themselves. It's the teams and they're playing match play and that sort of stuff. So it's the size of the event really took my breath away in a sense. So I didn't understand it until I could see the layout of where the grandstand. So I went there in July, and everything was just starting to come into the site. So they'd marked out where the stands were going to be. That they've got some, the media tent was starting to be built, all those sorts of things. And it was staggering. And I'd only seen the course once before, the year before. So 12 months earlier, they were building a new back tee on 18 East, which will be the 16th for this tournament, the President's Cup. So 12 months earlier, they were starting to improve, or not so much improve, because it does take a while to prep for a course. You've got to do all these things so that the tees and any areas that they're going to, say, rebuild or add or change need to have had a bit of time to grow in and feel like they've always been there. So last year, they were building a new tee on what will be the 16th for this tournament to have it ready. So the size really got me, just how many people were expected to come. It's going to be incredible.
And what about from an agronomy perspective, did Richard give you an insight into, any little bits of gold that you can enlighten us with? I played there fairly recently. When was it? October. And as you said, the build for the event was starting to take shape well and truly by then. And but I guess was there anything that he told you that that was going to be about the course and this course setup, the firmness or the width of the fairways, or I don't know.
Yep. No, absolutely. And you're right. Sorry, it was October when I went down because I did just miss you, I think, that time.
Yeah.
When he showed me around, not July. So, yeah, we know the sandbelt courses and that they play firm and they're going to be a little bit more, certainly more of the ground game than some other courses that we're used to seeing. But it's the firmness that really surprised me. Just what the ground game is and the prep of the greens. So the way that they'll be sort of really firming them up by top dressing those greens, drying them out in a sense that it's going to come down to hand watering just to get the right moisture content, to not have them overwatered. It's not about keeping them, getting them through a hot period or whatever. This is purely prep for tournament for the week of the event, or what's 2 weeks. There's a Junior President's Cup on the week before. So they will be just firming up all the areas of the greens really, really well. And I've actually had a video on my Instagram when I went down there. Richard's bouncing the ball on the green and showing me how bouncy it is. And I'd never seen anything like that. Coming from New South Wales, we don't really have that type of green surface so much here, being more humid, that sort of stuff. There are courses that have it, but yeah, Richard was just explaining what they want to achieve. I
remember that video. If you did that in New South Wales at some of your courses up there, you would have left plug marks. It would have had to finish. He was throwing the ball into the green as hard as he could, and it was just bouncing off it like it was concrete.
Well, it reminded me of bouncing on a cricket wicket.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it looked like, but there was grass on it. So in my head, I'm looking at this thing happening, and it's got this wooden clunk. And Richard says to me, I said, mate, that's incredible. And he goes, yeah, look, it's still not quite there. We've still got a bit of time to go. He said it needs to be more clunky, and the bounce could be a little bit better. Yeah. And I was like, wow, this isn't artificial. This is real. It's growing grass on sandy soil, and we're trying to get this feel to how the golf game will be played. And that firmness really sets the tone for the course. So then you've got the surrounds in the approaches and the lead-ins to those greens where guys, if the pin's at the front of the green, you can't do what you do in Asia in some of the bigger tournaments in Asia or some of the American tournaments where the greens are certainly softer because they have high rainfall or they're high temperatures to keep the greens alive and that sort of stuff. And all golf courses are maintained differently by different people for different reasons. But in Melbourne, if the pin's in the front 10 metres of a green, you're going to see some really interesting golf being played on certainly some of the short par fours, whether they take an iron off the tee and how they hit into the green. Are they going to allow for a couple of bounces before it checks? Are they going to be running it up? What's the wind going to do? Will then dictate what they can do playing to. If the pin's at the back, are they just going to land it 10 metres short and literally roll it all the way up and around? So the firmness is a real focal point of how the President's Cup will be played, and certainly Royal Melbourne anyway. I mean, you've played it. I haven't played it yet myself. I've seen it a couple of times and walked it, but that firmness on the greens and the surrounds with their grass types that they have is really a focus for them. And the cooch grass that they have on the fairways, Richard was saying it's legend cooch. It's basically a strain of common cooch. He just talked about how much more effort it needs just to really get it working well for the course, just to lift it so it's growing nicely. But then they'll dry out the rough. So that they've got a period in that he sort of said there's some winter grass growing through the rough, bits and pieces like that. They don't go out there and just blanket spray like courses do to eliminate weeds and some grassy weeds. They're a lot more. The feel that I got from Richard was some of those areas, they're just going to let the natural attrition of the seasonal change where it's dry, it's hot, that'll burn off a lot of the winter grass. It'll then soften and thin out some of those rough areas. So you'll have areas that will run through, that'll skip. The course will part of its defence is its firmness and its roll. So that's where you'll see bunkers come into play, how they roll into bunkers, how they roll off fairways into rough, if they hit them through corners. It's not going to be a case of stopping it, letting it sit up on a nice dense sward of grass in the rough. It'll be sitting down in thin, firm base soil rough. I mean, there's going to be recovery shots that are going to be unique to Australia. So the dryness that's going to be part of this year anyway, it doesn't look like we're going to get much rain anywhere on the east coast of Australia before the event to change the look of the course and the feel of the course. If we get any short-term rainfall before it, that might change it on the day of play, for example. But generally speaking, I think you're going to see some really great golf. And for match play, it's going to be fantastic to watch. It really is.
Well, it will bring in the blend of, some of those big bombers who, want to just smash driver. And it's a course that, with the width of the fairways, you can smash driver. But then, as you say, that approach then leaves you a different strategy to, your traditional, placer of the ball who, is going to think about a different way to get his ball and golf his ball onto the green. And yeah, that's going to be the real interesting part for me, is watching some of the big bombers and then watching some of the international strategists and some of the guys that have got a little bit more experience. Maybe those played a bit more in Europe and that sort of thing. So it's going to be very interesting to see. Now,
yeah, it will.
Thank you, mate. What about, where was your next course you went to? You went to Royal Adelaide recently, did you not?
I did. I was fortunate enough to head down to Adelaide, and I did get to go and see Nathan Bennett, the superintendent at Royal Adelaide. Now, I've never been to Adelaide for golf, to even look at golf courses or anything like that. So it was something that on the back of Royal Melbourne that I thought, you know what, if I have the opportunity with the time that we're spending down, and it turned out that I had a morning, I did get in touch with Nathan, and he was, again, very kind with his time. And Royal Adelaide, for me, we often talk about the courses that we all know and we all hear of, and that are well played in tournaments throughout Australia. And Royal Adelaide's had its share, but in probably the time of my greenkeeping career, we talk about the Dr. Mackenzie's and all those sorts of ones in the Sandbelt that have been touched by him, New South Wales, Royal Sydney, the Australian, and the ones of Sydney that we all know where the tournaments have been held. And Royal Adelaide has sort of slipped the conversation, is probably the way I'll say it.
Definitely under the radar. Definitely under the radar.
Yeah, it is. And so it wasn't basically started by Dr. Mackenzie. So he's come into it during his 26th Whirlwind Tour of Australia, as they call it, and came up with a review of the master plan, a layout of the course, and they adopted some of those changes along the way. But it was started by Cargie Reimel, who basically, he and Gardner were two of the mainstays of the club in the very early days when it began, and they basically routed the course and built the course in a sense. And then Mackenzie had come in and said, these are some changes which I think you should adopt, which will benefit greatly. And of course he was right. The ones that they did adopt, the famous short par 4 third hole, which is, when you see it in person, is absolutely astonishingly beautiful. And there's a number of his touches there, but like I said, it slips the modern conversation. We get lost a little bit with the Cape Wickhams and the Barnbugles and these sorts of places that are modern day masterpieces, and certainly the stalwarts of golf bucket lists. And then the odd one slips through. Now, Royal Adelaide is certainly ranked very well in the top numbers of Australian golf course ratings. It bounces in and around the top 10 thereabouts usually, but it just isn't talked about. Now, I've got to say, and I've done a couple of things on my Instagram about it as well. I would suggest to anyone to fly to Adelaide just to play Royal Adelaide and then fly home. Mm. It's that good. Now, I didn't have time to play it. I didn't get the opportunity. But my 2 hours that I spent there was an hour with Nathan or thereabouts, and then I just basically spent an hour just walking around myself, just in amazement of the lay of the land and the landscape that it's in. Everyone talks and knows about the train, and that's such a unique quirk to the golf course. But it's the sand dunes and the sandy soil and the way that they're used in the holes as defence, and used in to your advantage to play golf as well if you learn some of the nuances. But wow, and the contrast. The sand down there is a lot darker a tan in colour, and you get certainly South Australia is the driest state in the country of Australia, so you have a dryness that comes through, really dries out the leaf blades and the seed heads in the rough, and you have these really high contrasting colours and textures, and it's such a postcard. It really, the only one I can think of that I've seen myself that reminds me of Royal Adelaide in certainly Melbourne was the Dunes golf links down the Mornington.
Oh, really?
It just has those, it just has those contrasting colours with the long wispy grass, and just because there's just wavy hills in the background and that sort of stuff. So, I mean, I hadn't played the Dunes for it was a long time ago now, but Royal Adelaide it's got some wonderful, wonderful golf holes that have stood the test of time. And, it needs to be back in the world of golf bucket lists that people should visit. It really is sensational.
Yeah, I definitely get the sense that it's very underrated, but underestimated in terms of its prowess and stateliness as one of Australia's gems of golf courses.
Absolutely, and I think, and you know, I've started to talk to golf course architect Harley Cruz and do a little bit of interviewing with him and that sort of stuff. And talking to Harley, he's like, Royal Adelaide is very well regarded. Yeah. And so in the golf course circles of architecture and certainly greenkeeping, that it is. But I think in the populous circles where we talk about going to play and have to fly here and do this and do that, it's not talked about so much.
And it's worth the trip to Adelaide if you can get on there, if you can get access to there and play it. You know, you've got Kooyonga just over the road, and you've got the Grange, 36 holes down there. You
do, and then you've got Glenelg as well.
Glenelg down there. I saw some pictures. Golf Guy 77, who we hosted at Peninsula Kingswood on Sunday. Chris. He was over there, played Glenelg and Royal Adelaide on the same day before he flew across to New Zealand. Yep. And he was just raving about Glenelg. But you've got Linkslady Bay down the road. And,
that's get a good rap. And Mount Compass is coming of age as well.
Ben's doing a great job with the social media for Mount Compass. It looks fantastic. The pictures that young Ben puts up on that is awesome. So put Adelaide on your bucket list.
Absolutely,
destination list. Now, we'll talk about one more course, and it's one that's very close to my heart, as my listeners will know, and that's Peninsula Kingswood, because you spent some time there when you were in Melbourne on one of the trips. And was it Glenn that took you around there, Glenn Stewart?
No, Glenn Stewart was actually on annual leave, but he was kind enough in his time away to put me on to one of the superintendents, and I think it's the North Course, Ben Payne.
Yep.
And wonderful guy, Ben. Again, I can't thank all these guys enough for their time, because it does take time out of their day. Anyone who's interested in golf has heard about Peninsula Kingswood and its transformation and its new path forward. And I've seen photos, videos, spoken to people who've been there. You've got yourself, as you mentioned, it's close to your heart, being a member of the club. You can easily find a lot of imagery and videos about the course. But again, until you're there, you don't get a sense of scale, immersion of the landscape once you're literally standing there. Probably the only thing I can say that really hopefully gives it some credit is I don't think I've ever been more surprised by a golf course than Peninsula Kingswood because of its hype, and I was still surprised.
That's pretty positive.
I hope that does give it enough credit, but I expected a lot, and it overwhelmed me. Yeah. It really was that good, and the work that OCCM, which is now Mike Clayton's moved on to different ventures. It's now OCM, but the work they've done there is remarkable, to say the least. It's like nothing I could have expected either. The way that they've brought the golf course and the landscape out together, and obviously it was 2 courses previous, and you would know a lot more about that than I do, but just taking it on the way that I experienced it when I visited, the way that they've brought the course and the landscape out together as one, to make it feel like our version of Tara Edie, or, just the sand that abounds and the way that you can play golf around it. It's such a wonderful wallpaper to walk through and I'm sure play golf on. Being a member there, I've got it. So for me, it really puts itself up on par with all of the other mainstay courses that we know of and hear about in the Sandbelt. I can't think of any reason why it would be considered of any lesser a facility than a Kingston Heath, a Metropolitan, a Royal Melbourne. To me, you walk in there or you drive in there and you see it and you just go, this is as good as it gets. What else could you ask for?
So was there anything you learnt from the team down there that, stood out in the way that they're prepping the course, what they're doing with the course? Is there anything that, was different that you learnt?
Well, there's they're using, which has now started to be put on a few golf courses around the place, is Pure Distinction bent grass. It's now been there on some of those greens now for 4 years.
Yep.
So they're starting to see how it's performing, having been used for quite some time. And as far as the surface prep in the way that they maintain the golf course, for me, I'll probably learn a lot more. So Pure Distinction, like I said, it's new grass, and it seems to be performing really well for them. A lot of courses have not had it in that long to be able to sort of talk about how it's performing as it's maturing. Again, a lot of it is in the top dressing. In modern golf course maintenance, we're now looking for more regular light top dressing to maintain surfaces better. It means that you don't have to go back. I say have to go back, but you're not doing the old renovations that we remember, where plenty of courses still do it. There's nothing wrong with it, but where you go out and you core your greens twice a year, and they're out of the rough play now, for 3 or 4 weeks after you do a heavy top dress and all that sort of stuff. They're moving along, and this new Pure Distinction is allowing for this regular top dressing, regular dethatching. It keeps the surface manageable so much better by doing this if you've got the equipment to allow for it. Just the way they maintain their greens, it's becoming more commonplace to move away from the big 2 renovations per year and just do regular routine light stuff. You can still play on it straight after they do a light top dress, and it's still very much playable. There's no upsetting the year and dodging events, whether it be corporate or championships and that sort of stuff. So that was really interesting to see how those surfaces were maturing. And I was looking for a little bit more on the construction side and the architecture side with Peninsula Kingswood for me. They've got some unique darker sands there that they use around their bunker edging to get that. They want to get towards that really crisp Metropolitan style golf bunkers and green blends, that laser cut edge. And they're, some of the way that they've utilised it, just things that people don't think about. I'm now looking at is the placement of their cart paths and how they use them. So some of the cart paths, at Peninsula Kingswood, are through the sand waste areas in the carry zone from the tee to the fairway, and they are concrete the way that they've laid them out in that they hide them from view. So as you approach the tees, you can't see them. They're the same or very similar coloured concrete to the sand itself. So again, from a distance, it's not aesthetically absurd to look at this great big concrete path barreling from the tee to the fairway. You don't even know it's there. So those sorts of little things I was really interested in. The way they use some of their stone through their creek line that they use on the south course, that they instigated on the course and opened up around the place. So they use a lot of, I think it's a bluestone type thing that they have down there. And just some of the draping of the surrounding grass, letting the cooch just roll in over these areas that they'd put the stone. So it felt like it had been there for, like some of the British Isle courses that they've been there for 100 years. You were getting these really aged effects really quick. So I was looking for a lot of that stuff as well. But pure distinction on the greens, it's a bit of a buzz name in golf green grass at the moment, and a lot of courses are using it or going into using it. Victoria's another one that's prepping for when they host the Oz Open. I think it's in 22. All their greens have been resurfaced with pure distinction, and it looks immaculate. Yeah,
I played there recently too, and it's those greens are fantastic. And to me, they just were like a little carbon copy clone of the greens 2 years ago at Peninsula when they were a little bit newer. They're perfect. But it was good to hear your feedback on Peninsula Kingswood. Obviously, I wax lyrical about it a lot, but it's always nice to hear that it is.
Honestly, I can totally see why. I thought the hype was hype, in that when I got there it would be a real golf course, but it's so much more than the hype. It's incredible.
Well, it's pretty much all finished now. It's been finished for a while, but the surrounds around the gym and the pool and the tennis court and the bowls green, it's all finished. The short game area, which you would have seen on the left-hand side as you drove in,
yes,
which is sensational, is now open. The interesting thing is, it's probably, like a lot of new developments, needs a summer season, needs a growing season, but they were quite keen to get people onto the short game greens and the short game area to start using it. And the message that we seemed to get was the greens respond to when there is play, even if they're just a little bit, ready. And a couple of greens on the courses were brought into play. And the feedback was like, they respond better when people are walking on them and playing on them, and they seem to activate more. Or I don't know. Is there a reason for that?
Well, probably a little bit, yeah. At the end of the day, if they're when you're building and growing in a green ready for play, you're already working that surface. You're already working the grass. So if you're working it from a maintenance point of view, why keep golfers off it? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You're working with the machines. You're cutting it. You might be top dressing it. You might be lightly dethatching it, just keeping that leaf, fluffing it up, getting it ready to cut, then rolling it flat. So you're doing all this work to the surface and to the grass itself. There's no point keeping players off it for the sake of because it's still young. I remember when we were doing bits and pieces at Katoomba, and I've read articles about courses being grown in. At 3 months, pretty much 12 weeks, you well and truly want to be playing golf on it. I think that's my opinion. Now it's a vague number, and I've done some things sooner than that for different reasons, and I'm sure guys have done it I've done it at 8 weeks, guys have done it at 10, and some people wait 5 months.
Yeah.
There's a lot of factors, but yeah, if you're working that surface, there's no point. I don't see a point in keeping golfers off it because you're on it every day anyway. So,
well, we're on all of them now, and it's absolutely fantastic. The short game area, which I'm very much looking forward to. Everyone knows that my short game is my pain point, so I was down there chipping some balls today, which is great, mate.
Unreal.
What's the next course on the agenda for you? Who are you talking to? So you're talking to Harley Cruz, and you doing some interviews with him, and they've been really interesting and engaging from what Harley's got to say. Obviously a very well respected and regarded course architect in Australia. What's next else as well?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, so I'm doing a bit of work with Harley. I'm trying to, I suppose, discuss and open up a lot of the behind the scenes, the unknowns. Architecture's very, I suppose, specialised, of course. Very professional people, and they're not everywhere. We all know some of the names in Australia, and Harley's well respected and certainly well versed in his works throughout Southeast Asia and Australia, and some of the stuff that he's done. And just Harley's and I are sort of really enjoying that the conversation and bringing out some of those background things. And he's done a lot of work in Killara in Sydney. It's a very well-known private golf course that's just redone full 18 greens reconstruction. And I want to do more into that with Harley if when he has the time, and he's said that he's keen to do some more as well when the opportunities arise. So talking about architecture is good, understanding why and how it works and what the end result is for golf out on a golf course. I love interviewing superintendents and greenkeepers alike, and I'm going to be doing a little bit more of that as well, different types of courses. So I tend to do it as I travel around and get the chance and the opportunities. Some of them will be local to me in here on the northern beaches of Sydney. Some of them, hopefully will be some country courses and the like. So I just want to be able to bring some more out to people, different types of courses. It doesn't always have to be the Royal Melbournes of the world.
Yeah.
It doesn't always have to be the Australians of the world.
I totally agree.
And being from the country, from the bush, I want to try and also bring out, I went to, along the Murray, went to Tokemwell Golf Club, and they've got a 36-hole facility there. And I caught up with Ben, superintendent of the courses down there, and it was really nice to engage with someone who is a superintendent of not a very high-profile golf course in amongst the talks of Australian golf, but talk about what they do. They don't do anything terribly differently. They just have less people to do it with.
Yeah. Tokemwell is one of the most popular river destination courses for anyone in Melbourne. Where are you going to play? Where are you going for the weekend? Oh, we're going to Tokemwell.
I couldn't believe it when he told me. Just the numbers are staggering.
Yeah.
But the Murray is a wonderful golf destination of Australia, and I've never been there before. So I've known Ben because he used to be a superintendent further up in the lower Central West at Young Golf Club, we've known Ben for a couple of years now. And then when he made the move back to Tokemwell for him, it was a wonderful facility to see. If it's out in the bush, it doesn't mean that it's a goat track. And I think a lot of people do sometimes think that we hear about drought and that sort of stuff. It doesn't mean that the courses are terrible to play on. It doesn't mean that they're so dry they're unplayable. It doesn't mean that you're playing on a dust bowl. It just means that the landscape is drier than normal, very much drier than normal. And guys and girls that are looking after golf courses, whether they be professionally paid or volunteers, just have to, I suppose, work around those issues and problems with what they have. And a lot of them do wonderful jobs in that and provide great golf courses to play on. I want to try and bring a little bit more of the bush out to people and see courses, talk about golf courses. I know I've visited the Central West quite regularly, and Duntry League at Orange is one of my favourites. And it's a wonderful golf course, routed by Eric Appley, and who did the early work on New South Wales, for example, and Newcastle Golf Club. So it's a wonderful golf course, quality surfaces. Grant, the superintendent out there, and his team do a wonderful job with their water availability and the like. So there's great golf courses to be played at, certainly in holiday destinations, whether they be wine regions or sports regions or whatever it might be. And you can always find a golf course to play, and that's part of the fun of travel that I find now. Throw the clubs in the back if you're going away for a weekend. See if you get a time to play. And even if it's 9, you're going to enjoy it.
Absolutely.
And talk to people and see what's around, what's worth playing. Send me a message and say, hey, Steve, I'm heading out west in New South Wales. What's worth playing? Or talk to Ross and say, Ross, what's out in Northern Victoria that's worth playing? We're so well connected now through social media that it's easy to find some information about what's worth playing, and some of them you'd be surprised and you go, I'd never even heard of that, John. Wow. I played 9 holes there on a recommendation. I had a morning off, or I had a morning available, and Ross said to go and have a hit there. And you know what? I really enjoyed it. And it was nice to go to a place that doesn't see a lot of golfers, doesn't have a lot of money, but I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed having a beer there afterwards, talking to some of the locals, and I felt like, I was part of the local town while I visited. It was great.
Well, mate, I'm certainly enjoying watching your journey as the Golfing Greenkeeper, and I'm certainly enjoying getting to know this great golfing community that we have here in Australia and globally. And I'm sure that you will get and grow the Golfing Greenkeeper page substantially. If you want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that? Just direct message you at the Golfing Greenkeeper?
Yeah, find me on Instagram. The Golfing Greenkeeper is the handle. Just send me a direct message, drop me a line, say hey, comment on one of my posts, and if you want to know anything about any of my travels or places that I've been, or just some tips about, what's worth visiting, what time of year is a nice place to go and visit to play golf and the like, more than happy to help out wherever I can. Just get in touch. It's so easy, and I'm all too happy to talk to people about golf and greenkeeping and architecture. It's just any of those topics are all fun, and if it's a bit of a common thought process and a bit of passion, I love discussing it too. It's great fun. So comment on my posts and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's good fun.
Mate, I got the feeling that we could talk about golf and greenkeeping and architecture and all things to do with that type of part of our world for a long time. I've kept you for an hour. It's late. You've probably got to get up and drive another ridiculous amount of hours to go to another job in the morning. So I'm going to let you go. But I really do appreciate you coming on, and we've been talking about it for a while. I appreciate you tagging me in all of the posts because I get to see everything that you're doing. And every time I look at what you are doing, I learn something or pick up something that I didn't know. So I appreciate that. Appreciate your time, mate. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ross. And, mate, I really appreciate you having me on. It's been a wonderful time to talk. Like-minded, someone who's interested in everything to do with golf. And, mate, love the podcast, especially that intro tune. Massive fan. I was going
to give you one little tip in. You should make contact with Mitchell Driver, who was a guest on the podcast about episode 15. I'm not sure if you've listened to that.
I have listened to Mitchell.
I don't know if you know Mitchell, but he's just back in Australia from Glen Eagles, where he worked during the Solheim Cup and worked for the last 12 months or so, and he's at Royal Canberra. So continuing your Royal theme, you might want to make contact with Mitchell. I know he listens to the podcast, as does his dad, George. You might want to make contact with Mitchell and head down to Royal Canberra and check that out. He's a great guy.
Royal Canberra's been on my list, so no, I'll do that. I'll get in touch with Mitchell, and the podcast you had with him was fascinating listening. So it's like all your podcasts, mate. So I really enjoy them. They're wonderful to listen to, and certainly a great insight to lots of different people involved in the sport in one way or another. So, mate, well done to you, because it's really becoming popular, and I think it's wonderful that it's great content. People enjoy it, and golf's about characters and the people in the sport, right? So it's fascinating. Love it.
Steve, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us on the My Love of Golf podcast. Until next time, thanks for your time. Appreciate that.
Thanks,
Goodbye.
Bye, mate.